I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, the Toolbox for Grief and Loss is a comprehensive guide for anyone who is suffering from loss, whether it is recent or long past. Written by Valerie Umscheid, a registered psychologist and therapist with 20 years of experience, this book explores in many ways loss can impact our lives and provides practical tools to help us on our journey through grief and find joy in living once again. We are delighted to have Valerie join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Good River Print and Media for helping us put Valerie in the spotlight. And we ask those watching to support writers like her by subscribing to our channel. Valerie, thank you so much for being our guest.
Well, thanks, Logan. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And you're in beautiful, sunny Mexico, which is a great place to get your spirits rejuvenated. And that's kind of what your book is all about. How do we get ourselves back together again after going through a terrible situation? Until you lose someone in your life, you don't realize how heartbreaking that can be. And unfortunately, that's a situation we all find ourselves in at one point or another. So tell me a little bit about the inspiration for the book. Let's start there.
Okay. I started writing the book about 2 years ago, and I'm a therapist. I was working with a lot of people that were stuck in grief and really needed some resources. And what I realized was many people suffer needlessly. They experience grief for long periods of time because they don't know how to heal. And so I wanted to write a very helpful, kind of practical book that would help people have the tools that they can move forward in their healing journey.
It's very important, for sure, to have these tools. Let's talk about grief for a second. Do you sometimes feel people hold on to that grief because that's all they have left as far as a strong connection to that person who has left us?
Sometimes, but I also think that many people believe that myth that somehow time heals all wounds and they'll just get better. And unfortunately, for many people, that doesn't happen. And their pain goes on for months or even years. And I've worked with many clients like that. And so there are some very helpful healing strategies that people can use that will help them move forward.
Well, we've got some time today, so let's go through a couple of these. I mean, obviously, the book is a great resource, and you're going to want to read that, particularly if you are going through a troubled time. And whether that means whether you are a psychologist or a therapist that's helping people, or somebody in need yourself of this toolbox for grief. So what are some of the tools that people can use to help to get over a loss?
Well, I don't think we actually get over it. I think we reconcile ourselves to it, which I think is a little different because even though people process loss, there's still going to be times when they feel sadness, like anniversary dates, birthdays, and things like that. So one of the most helpful healing strategies in my book is something called a process letter. And a process letter helps people acknowledge and move through the different underlying emotions that people experience with grief. Some of the ones, of course, that most people acknowledge are anger. Even though they might have expected the death, they still might have a lot of anger. Of course, sadness, guilt. Sometimes people wish they would have told their loved ones something important before they passed on. Regret. Sometimes that can be a big issue for people, especially with people with unfinished business with their loved one. And of course, just yearning. When we love someone, we miss them so much and we have yearning for them. And so a process letter helps people to write to their loved one expressing those emotions. But what's really important about it is that when you acknowledge the emotions, you have to actually allow yourself to feel the emotions. And so for many people, they don't like to go to the pain, and not going to the pain prevents them from healing. So we need to acknowledge the pain of loss.
Mm. it can be overwhelming, the pain of loss. And some people, when they lose someone, don't have the tears and they come later. So I guess that grieving period is different for each individual. Do you find that with people?
Yes, I do. And a lot has to do with their history. So I've seen many people with, they come from families where it wasn't a good thing. It wasn't safe to express their emotions. And so sometimes what happens is they won't go there because in the past it wasn't safe to do so. And so a lot of those people sometimes even develop addictions because they're trying to push down that pain that they're feeling. And so I think there can be different reasons why people won't acknowledge it. I worked with one client and she was working away for a long period of time. She wasn't actually able to get back for the funeral service or celebration of life. And so for her, she kind of compartmentalized that grief and put it to the side because she was trying to fulfill a work obligation. So I think there's different reasons why people don't move through the grief and heal.
Let's get back to your process letter for just a second. What actually goes in the letter as we try to get to that area of pain?
What goes in the letter is the person is actually writing to the person that's moved on, and
Now,
and
let me
so
just interrupt you for a second. Now, you say moved on. Do you feel, and I'll get back to the letter for
yeah,
sure, but do you
yeah.
feel that the grief for someone who has died is similar as the grief you feel for somebody who has left you and is still alive?
I think that it's different in some respects because it has a lot to do with attachment to the person that has left. So for some people that are experiencing, for example, a divorce or separation, it can be very complicated because actually the losses that they have are not just the loss of the relationship, but they have actually lost other things. They might have lost their extended family. They might have lost their place of residence. They might have lost secure income. There can be so many reasons why people have trouble moving through that loss.
Yeah. So they're kind of the same in that there's a lot of pain, but there are differences, of course. And unlike the permanency of death, with a relationship, you never know if it might rekindle. You never know what might happen down the road. And that gives some people hope, and hope, I'm sure, is helpful. So you're writing this process letter and you're addressing it to the person who has died, mom, dad, whomever that might be, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. So you would be writing it to the person that has moved on, whether it's someone who has died. For example, another example is in my book, I talk about the loss that comes with stillbirth or miscarriage, for example. And a lot of women, about 20% of women actually experience that. And oftentimes it's not recognized, that kind of loss.
Right.
And so in that case, they would actually be writing the letter to their baby that has died. And so in that, they're again expressing the heartbreak, but it's really related to the future that they're not going to experience with their baby. So when it comes to other kinds of loss, where it looks different, where we're going to go through all those very heartfelt emotions, such as anger, sadness, guilt, regret, yearning, talking about the lost dreams, the lost future. A lot of times people don't realize that that's so important. When we have a loss, there's all these lost dreams of the future that go with that lost relationship.
Yeah. Exactly. The trip that was never taken, the house that was never purchased, the children that never were born. Yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
And do you think I don't mean to put a time limit on it, but how long does it take for you to come to terms with the grief, do you think, for a person to get back to feeling happy again?
Mm. Well, that's a magic question.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's different for everyone.
yeah,
I really think with the experience I've had working with so many different people is it really depends on the attachment they have with that person, how long they've been in relationship. Often with spouses, they've been in a relationship, maybe 20, 40 years.
yeah,
Again, parents could be the longest relationship we ever have. And if there's unfinished business with that person, it takes longer because
yeah,
there's actually things from the past that the person hasn't worked through. And so, it could take a long time. Sometimes it can take several months, especially if it was an expected death. A lot of times the person may have worked through some of the loss before their loved one died.
yeah,
But at other times it could take a couple of years or even longer for people that have been in a long-term relationship because there's so much loss,
yeah. Yeah,
right?
I often say to people when they're dealing with grief and loss is that you don't get over it, like you said, but you learn to live with it.
Yes.
But it's almost like having a bad knee or something that you never know when it's going to go out on you again. Do you
And
kind of
and
feel the
that's
same way? I mean, I feel when I lost my parents, I mean, I lost my parents 5 years apart. My mother was 80, my father was 85, so they lived a long life.
right.
I had a great relationship with my mother. So when she died, I felt terrible, but I kind of got over it. My father I did not have a good relationship with. And till this day, I grieve the fact that we didn't have a friendship.
Right.
So I think that kind of proves your
Yeah.
point in a way that it depends on what kind of unfinished business you had when the person dies, right?
Right. Yeah, it does make a huge difference. And I can definitely relate to you, Logan, because one of the things I talk about in my book is I just share a short story about unfinished business I had with my dad.
Mm,
And that was interesting, but it was a gift to me in many ways because I really learned that I needed to use actually several strategies to be able to heal.
yeah.
Yeah. Because of that unfinished business that went back to my childhood with my father.
Yeah. And part of it is generational, that our dads were not as involved in our lives as dads are today in many cases. So dad was kind of coming home, bringing home the check, and mom was taking care of everything. So that is a common complaint or a common malady amongst children who've lost their fathers, is that they didn't know their father better. I think perhaps as a TV news reporter, I can tell you the worst cases of grief I ever encounter, and it doesn't matter how old the child is, it's the loss of a child. I mean, the
Mhm.
child can be 30 or the child can be 40 or the child can be 2. There's nothing worse. What do you say when somebody comes to you, with their face, red from crying their heart out and their eyes swollen, and they've lost their baby, they lost their child?
Yeah. Well, my heart goes out to them.
Yeah,
And I really tell them I'm so sorry for the pain that they're going through. But I also tell people that there's hope and that they can heal. And it's not an easy journey, but it's worth it because we're going to have other losses in life. And we need to know how to do it. We
yeah.
need to know how to process loss to be able to um, feel happy and re-experience joy again.
Hmm. It's incredibly difficult. That is one of the most difficult scenarios. And like I said, it's part of life. You go through these terrible times. That's one instance of life you hope you never have to go through. or anyone you know ever has to go through.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the role that people around the person who are grieving, how can like the brother or the sister or the father, how can you help somebody who's grieving?
That's a really great question. And I appreciate you asking that question because I think a lot of people don't know how to be supportive.
Right.
So a lot of people will just say, well, just let me know how I can help, or let me know what you need. But really what the person needs is for you to be present,
Right.
to sit with them in their pain and to listen to them and to ask questions, like, what do you miss most about your son or your daughter? And tell me, the memories that are most important to you. Like, we really need to be vulnerable with them and be able to hear their pain and to not just, show up with a casserole, although that's very nice, but we actually need to be there with them and to remember them, not just after the funeral service or 6 months later. Often people go, well, they should be better now.
Mm.
But no, we need to stay in touch with people. We need to call them. We need to sit with them. We need to ask them about, their thoughts, about their lost dreams that they had with that person. I remember working with one family and their son was lost in a tragic car accident, and they were so devastated. And it was so hard for them to imagine the future without him.
Mm.
And we had to, talk a lot about those lost dreams, but also recognize that those memories can never be taken away.
Right.
And so I encourage them to, make a memory box and write their most favorite memories of him and include pictures of him and really acknowledge the gift that he was in their lives.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we need to do when people are suffering from loss. We need to open our hearts to them and embrace them and love them.
Right. And it's hard for us sometimes to be that friend, to be that support person, because seeing their grief hurts us. I mean,
Yes.
even having this conversation with you, it brings up a lot of emotion in me. And I'm sure it's torture on many levels for you sometimes when you're talking to people who are devastated. There's a physical reaction to grief and hearing about grief. And that's
Yes.
part of what makes it so difficult, right?
Yes, it does. That's right. We feel it in our hearts. When
Yeah.
people say heartbroken, they're not kidding. They actually feel that loss physically, somatically,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it's a real, real pain, physical pain that we feel. So I think for me, like, I've been a therapist for 20 plus years now, and so I'm actually able to sit with people in their pain.
Hmm.
Because I know that part of what I do helps people heal. And sometimes when people have had a traumatic loss, I've worked with lots of clients who have had a loved one die from suicide or in a tragic accident, then sometimes they need other types of therapy to heal. And so, although a lot of times we can do a lot of the work ourselves, sometimes people need special help. They actually need to do trauma therapy to process some of the memories. Sometimes people get locked in with certain images that are very devastating,
Hmm.
but we can actually heal those. We don't have to hold on to those terrible images or memories of how the person died. We can actually heal that.
Yeah. You make a good point, and it's important for the people who are going through grief to talk to someone like yourself, because our metaphorical hearts are so closely related to our actual hearts that people do die of broken hearts and do develop illnesses born out of grief. So to find someone that you can talk to, who can give you hope, who will listen to you, who will be there, who will listen to the memories you have of the person that you've lost, is invaluable.
It is invaluable, right?
Yeah.
And so I often recommend people, like sometimes we don't have someone in our life that we feel that we can be vulnerable with and feel safe with, then certainly we can seek out a therapist. But there are also wonderful community support groups. So in my community where I live, there's several churches that actually run support groups, which can be helpful. And then for others, therapy groups. So sometimes, like, for example, for young women that have lost a baby, there are therapy groups for them to help them process their loss with other women who are also experiencing that tragic loss.
Yeah. It's very helpful. You realize how good people are when you are faced with a tragedy. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, I probably covered more murders, killings, accidental deaths than most
Mm,
people because of the nature of my profession.
yeah.
And the goodness you see that comes from people at a time like that. Like you said, the person bringing a casserole and then more, the funeral home that offers to pay for the child's funeral free of charge. There's a lot of good out there for people, and there are a lot of resources out there for people who
Yeah.
need it. I'd imagine it was quite rewarding for you in many ways to put down this guide for people onto paper so the folks that you can't touch, directly by
Hmm.
meeting them, you can touch indirectly through your book.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's always been my goal, is to help more people heal. So I just wanted really practical strategies. So there's certainly there's so many other strategies in there that we probably don't even have time to talk about. But what I wanted to do is I wanted people to know that there is hope, that they can try these different healing strategies, and that they can move forward with their lives. And also for them to know that, if they are stuck, if they do need help, there's resources out there, that people don't need to suffer in silence.
Yeah. And exactly. This is a time where you turn to people, you turn to your clergyman, you turn to your family, you turn to a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever you need, because these are grievous situations. I actually have a friend who his 21-year-old son went out one night with a car and never came back, like, too many young people do. And he processes his grief by every day trying to honor his son. He posts a picture on Facebook that says the young man's name, and it has every, portion of the kid's life. And it's, he was a work friend of mine. So I kind of watched his children grow up on
Mm,
Facebook. And I think it's a very important thing for him, and empowering thing for him, like you said, to create this virtual memory box like you talked about, a memory box. That's what he's doing online. Do you feel
yeah.
like approaches like that are helpful to folks?
Yes, I think they can be helpful. I'm not sure about doing it every day. I think when people are initially grieving, I think it's important to spend 10 or even 15 minutes a day focusing on their loss. But then, because I am always concerned about people developing depression, it's then important that once they've done that grief work, that they go and do some positive activity, that they don't stay entrenched in grieving all day long. We
Right.
need to do the grief work, but then we need to live. I ask people, clients I see, I say, what would your loved one want for you? Would they want you to be grieving all day long, every day? I think most of us know that our loved one would want us to live,
Mm.
to feel joy, to embrace life. Yes, we have to do the grief work, but then we also need to live. We need to love. We need to be there for other people, right? So we need to do the work, but then we need to live.
And you also have to remember the people that you do love who are still around you. I mean, if you
Absolutely.
lose one child, you might have other children. If you lose a child, you might have a spouse. Whatever it is, you have to remember the connections that you do have. And I think that probably is helpful in coping in grief. And you make a great point that, that you need to focus on your grief for a portion of the day, but then focus on living for the majority of the day.
Yes.
I have a kind of a method I use when I feel sad about something. I tell myself to change the channel. So if I start focusing on something that's, hurtful to me in my life, whether it's grief and loss or whatever, I mentally tell myself, change the channel, focus on something else. Do you feel like that's a good coping mechanism?
Yes, I do actually. I think we need to learn to compartmentalize. And so sometimes I'll actually say to people like, can you think of like a container? Can you think of something that you could just let that pain, that grief flow into, and just leave it there until it's time to focus on your grief work? So I think that in a way it's similar, right? That we can put it aside for now and live, and then yes, we need to do the grief work. So at some point we have to pull it out and look at it, and we have to experience it to be able to heal. But yes, I think that can be really helpful.
If you're to leave the audience today with one message, what would that be?
My message would be choose to heal. We're all going to experience multiple losses in life. They're going to look different. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of a relationship. But we can heal. And we just need to do the work so that we can re-experience joy again in our lives.
Well said. Well said. There is hope. Life continues. The cycle of life is beautiful. It'll continue after the people we lose. It'll continue after us. And I'd imagine faith is very, very important at times of loss also, right?
Well, I know for me, it was very, very helpful. And I think that, having a belief that there's something more after death can be very helpful to many people. I've seen that it can really help them feel hopeful about being reunited with their loved one again. And so, hope takes different forms in different ways. But yes, I think hope is really, really important, and having faith that you will see your loved one again.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a powerful conversation. The name of the book is The Toolbox for Grief and Loss, Effective Healing Strategies. It is written by Valerie Umscheid. It is available wherever you get your books. It's recommended for anyone whose heart is breaking, who is grieving, who has lost someone. As Valerie said, whether it's a death, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a loss of a job, the feelings of the heart can be very, very similar when it comes to loss. And we've gotten great insight from Valerie today. And Valerie, we thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
It was a pleasure, Logan. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.